Good morning, everyone. Can we please come to order now? Thank you. Oh, I better turn this off. Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning, councillors. Good morning to our staff as well, members of the public, and of course, the media. Welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting, today, the 5th of August. I'd like to ask, are there any apologies, please? Councillor Maxwell? Good for him. Thank you. Councillor Maxwell? Thank you. Thank you. Moved, Councillor Sturt. Thank you. Seconded, Councillor Gould. Thank you. All those in favour of our apologies being accepted, please say aye. Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest? Any urgent business? Thank you. Item 4 on our agenda, confirmation of the minutes. The minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting of 20th of May 2015. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you. Councillor Gould, that they be confirmed as a true and correct record. Councillor Sturt?
5
Can I just
staff reports.
May I just ask if we could just have a seconder, please, before Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you. Councillor Sturt.
With regard to the recommendation regarding the Green Corridor, a number of the community have rung, and also a number of the shopkeepers and the retailers there, and I understood that we were going to undertake a parking review, because the suggestion has come forward that the middle parking, and I know that Councillor Rank has advocated this for years, that middle parking in Hinimoa Street be removed, and I just wondered whether that's part of the brief to go to the CBD Revitalisation Committee as part of their project, because, you know, I think they have got a strong case to remove that parking there and then reinstate the parallel parking or the horizontal parking outside those businesses, because they are being impacted at the moment. So I just wondered, Madam Chair, if staff could answer those couple of questions, please.
Thank you. Yes, as I understand it, that was to be part of the review, but I'll just get JP to respond to that. Thank you.
Madam Chair, there's a couple of aspects to that, and probably the first place I'll start is the work we've commenced on Haupapa Street. So having started the first section of the Green Corridor, as you're aware, we've been working through the city, with each section being completed. So we did the first part of Hinimoa Street on the other side of Fenton. Then we moved across Fenton Street into that section from Fenton to City Focus on Hinimoa Street. Yes, that's right. We're now commencing the section on Haupapa Street, so from Tutanekai Street through to Kurau Park. So that's underway at the moment. A couple of weeks ago, we actually sort of started to advise the building owners and the shops operating in that space. There's not too many retail shops, so they're mainly businesses. And we had a number of them actually contact us and just say, look, we are concerned about the narrowness of the street. And we had a very specific incident raised where a bus actually damaged a vehicle because it had started to come along that section of Haupapa Street and had got caught behind an SUV with a bike rack on the back and some bikes on it, and it actually couldn't get through. So they actually had to reverse back up the street right through to the roundabout, and that actually ended up resulting in some damage to another parked vehicle. So with those couple of phone calls and that concern about the safety of our central parking, before we even start altering it for the Green Corridor project, Portia Mackenzie went back out and had a conversation with all of the owners of buildings or businesses in that space and sort of said, look, is it going to be more feasible for us to remove the central parking and bring the parking across to the side of the Green Corridor as it exists in that section from Fenton through to towards the Polynesian Spa on Hinimau Street. So that's the example we've sort of cited to them. So we had a sort of a unanimous view back from all of the businesses in that space that that would be their preference. There was a variety of reasons cited, some saying it was more convenient for their business to have the parking against the cycleway, others citing the turning of traffic, trying to do U's to get to the next, the roundabout issue, and obviously this other one about the complexity or problems caused by buses and large vehicles and the oversized vehicles parking in the current bays. So we've actually sort of changed how we're delivering that next section. So that's what's happening on Hope Upper Street. So what we're sort of intending on doing is seeing how successful that looks, and as you've stated, the question then about central parking in other parts of the city, and back to that Hinimau question, will form part of the ongoing discussion around the parking review. So we're seeing, we've responded to this one straight away because it was particularly narrow and was causing problems, so we've changed that design straight away, but we will look at the overall parking implications for the city as part of the parking review.
Well, JP, the issues you raised...
Excuse me a moment, just a moment, please. We are just on the minutes, and we're not going to be...
I
No,
know.
we're not, I'm not going to be taking a discussion. This is just on confirming
Just
that they're true and
questions.
correct. Thank you.
It's just questions, Madam Chair, that I think are relevant to the time. I mean, there's considerable economic development going in Hope Upper Street, which you've recognised, but the issues that you raised that are indicative in Hope Upper Street are replicated in Hinimau Street. I don't think they can wait, because all you need is a double camper van there and the whole road can be blocked. So, Madam Chair, I just raised that. Staff are onto it.
Thank you.
At our next round of meetings, I would certainly like to see some issues come forward that the matter has been attended to.
Thank you, Councillor Bentley. In relation to the minutes?
In relation to the minutes, I'm referring to the last sentence of the minutes. It was noted that the four pro-democracy members of the council voted to have this matter discussed in open session. Now, we don't say the 9 or 10 mayor's poodles all voted in favour of it.
There's no need to be
So
no need to be rude, please. Inappropriate.
I'm not being rude, I'm just stating a fact. Why separate out 4 people whose name could be very well
Yes, thank you, CEO.
individualised?
Not usually a nasty.
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor, we went back and checked the tape on this particular item. I too was a little bit puzzled initially as to why we had deviated from the normal practice of simply naming the councillors. In this case, this was a verbatim comment recorded from staff, from in fact the councillor that made that motion, which was Councillor Kent. So this was exactly a verbatim comment that Councillor Kent asked to have noted.
Thank you. Then in future, I presume that we will just recommend what we would like to put down and have. So there shouldn't be any deviation, really. We should try to make sure that we're consistent across the board. Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Thank you. It's been moved. The minutes of the 20th of... Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Yes, Councillor Sharank.
We have been waiting for 2 years at least for this to happen, and it has not happened. I'm sick and tired of hearing it is under action and nothing happens. And it's the one thing that in the survey, NRB surveys, that people have come up with year after year, they're not happy with that parking. So can I have an indication when?
I think we've just heard that.
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor, I think we're using the word parking review. The parking review that staff are currently activating is in fact a review of the free parking initiative that was actually scheduled for this time. So that is actually on time. I think what you're requesting is actually a review of the inner city parking design, which is currently not actually on the work program other than the inner city revitalisation strategy, which you've actually seen is actually proposed back to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to... Thank you. I am going to put the... Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Gould, seconded by Your Worship, that the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting of the 20th of May be confirmed as a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. The minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting of the 1st of July. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, for this? Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Seconded, Councillor Sharank. Thank you. Any matters arising? Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Councillor Sharank. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Page 25 on our report. So on our item 5, our staff report, and the recommendation is that the report, Resource Management Act, arrangements to support Te Arawa involvement be received. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. It's been moved and seconded that the report, Resource Management Act, arrangements to support Te Arawa involvement be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. JP, you are going to introduce the report. Thank you. Good morning.
Morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, probably the easiest way for me to take you through what is quite a detailed paper with some quite long recommendations is really just to talk to the diagram I've included on page 26 of the agenda. And councillors, just you can see up there the sort of the basis of the diagram that tries to summarise what's in front of you as a set of recommendations. So really what we start with on the left-hand side, and it came out of the process around the Te Arawa proposal. So what you recall from the Te Arawa proposal was the inclusion of an iwi appointed commissioner to sit within the statutory hearings panel to consider resource consents, just to provide that Te Arawa perspective and view into the resource consent implementation. So what I've tried to traverse in this paper, councillors, is really just to look at what's out there in the way of good practice. Now, I always take the good practice information that we have with a caveat, because what's one group's good practice does not necessarily reflect the unique or specific requirements of our community. So it's a case of looking at what is out there for good practice and just seeing how that is relevant to what we have in front of us or our issues here in Rotorua. So in regard to that good practice information, I've spent some time looking at how Hamilton and Auckland have operated their independent commissioner panels. So they currently operate in that environment. Also looked, and I've included some of that information from MFE around their good practice guidance around the use of commissioners for resource consent hearings. So the key facets of that good practice information, which I think are particularly relevant for us in considering what we do with the Te Arawa proposal and what we do with our business moving forward, is really around does any changes or good practice recommendations lead to a better or a streamlined processing and clarity for applicants? Is it cost effective? Is there a chance of reducing the costs for applicants in the processing of resource consents or how we do business? And finally, something that's been quite important is that separation and transparency between the policy setting role of council and the operational delivery of consent hearing processing. So those are the three aspects of that good practice information, which I think are particularly relevant in how we've proposed this new framework for you. The second part, which leads into that discussion around where do we go with the Statutory Hearings Committee, is obviously what had been included within our statement of proposal and had been consulted on with our community, and that was around the involvement of Te Arawa in RMA processes. If you recall from our decision on the 26th of May, we took a decision then to postpone the detailed discussion on Te Arawa involvement in the RMA processes and for a couple of months and treat it separately. And obviously this report is now a result of that delay and that review of information. So if you recall, the Te Arawa proposal was to have involvement directly in the hearing of resource consent applications. So that was that 1/3 involvement that had been stated in the statement of proposal. In here there was, I've just referred back to the submission points that were raised, and if I recall from, and it's detailed in the report, we only received about 8 comments on the RMA aspect. So whilst there was a lot of comments broadly about where we went with the Te Arawa proposal full stop, the actual references to the RMA aspect were quite limited. Now, some of the issues that had been raised in that as to opposition against Te Arawa involvement in the RMA process were around the facts of concerns over the cost and what that created for applicants. So again, that's why I've referenced cost twice. So the cost of being involved in processing, a view around bias or concerns around bias, and a view of how that relates to something which is a sort of a quasi-judicial or a statutory function that's being undertaken with potentials to go to court if there was any view of bias. So concerns over that. And so those are the 2 main reasons that had been identified through that submission process. So again, that's a factor to make sure what we're proposing gives some safety and some certainty around the involvement of Te Arawa. And finally, what I've shown there, and it's probably identified in those 2 arrows, is what this council has undertaken as a sort of a philosophical shift to improve its transparency and its accountability, which is really that separation of strategy and policy from operational delivery. So that extends not only into the council structure, the formation of the different groups, but also in the way that the current committees are orientated. So we have a Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee looking at direction and policy setting, being separated from an Operation and Monitoring Committee, which is to look at the delivery and how things are undertaken. So that was sort of the basic reasons and the issues that were on the table for us to consider where we went with this paper as a proposal. So hence the picture in front of you, which has suggested a separation or a reduction in the terms of reference or the delegations applied to the Statutory Hearings Committee. So as you're aware, our Statutory Hearings Committee now deals with sort of what I've called strategic or overall land use rules. So that's the district plan, plan changes and major variations. So that's strategic level policy setting around land use in our district. But it also included the very much the operational consideration of resource consent applications. So that was the line to separate those 2 things out. So what's been proposed is to reduce the delegations for statutory hearings and recast that committee as an RMA policy committee. So obviously the requirements of that RMA policy committee remain fairly consistent with what we already had in place for our current Statutory Hearings Committee. And that really was this requirement that the members are commissioners and that we have an accredited chair to lead that group, because they would hear district plan variations and plan changes. The other aspect, and probably one that's quite important, is that we've now been through a massive process around our district plan, and probably the learnings we've taken out of that is the expectation that we really can't or should not be undertaking our district plan as a one-hit full process, the whole plan review sort of every 10 years, because it's a substantial piece of work and it really does not enable and empower our community really to engage with the detail, because it is the whole document. And that was a lot of the criticisms that came back through our district plan process. So what's been advocated from our planning team is to start undertaking more bite-sized pieces, so the rolling review approach. And obviously the first one, which was excluded from the district plan discussions, was what are we going to do about Lakes A zone. So our view is very much that RMA policy committee would have a reasoned and a managed workload, and that they could then start to roll through some of these more strategic land use processes. So in thinking about the submissions we received from Te Arawa, there was very much, and it's that recurring theme about a seat at the table and being involved at the right level of decision making. So hence the reason there for the proposal to have appointed to that RMA Policy Committee an iwi appointed commissioner. If you recall, there was some discussions through Tompkin Wake about the process, which would be they would recommend who they would want to see appointed onto that committee, but obviously the power of appointment sits solely with council. So that's the proposal there. So you can see there that that committee is reduced in size, so I've maintained the 3. And again, it comes back to one of those good practice principles, or one of the drivers I think is quite important, is the cost. So sitting under that RMA Policy Committee would also be the requirement that any private plan changes would be assessed through that group. Now, obviously, that becomes a cost to that applicant. So for anyone who was about to ask me, why 3? Why not 4? Why not 5? Why not 7? It's because of that cost factor. So what I've tried to do is at least maintain, very similarly to our current statutory hearings committee, the numbers involved at 3 to keep the consistency in the general consistency in the costs for anyone putting forward a private plan change. In the report, I've also detailed the current accreditations and chair accreditations, and currently that sits with only one councillor, and that was Councillor Hunt. So hence the recommendation that Councillor Hunt should be the chair of that new committee. So councillors, that's you can see there that what we've got there in my little box off the side with the arrow pointing to that is what I've just talked about, which is that iwi involvement through the Te Arawa board to recommend a commissioner. And so that request that had come from Te Arawa as part of the Te Arawa proposal was that 1/3 involvement. And so what we've done here is we've stayed true to that request and also made sure that it's a seat at the table where the right decisions are being made. So that's our strategic policy committee in that space. So councillors, the next process, and this is really reflecting on that separation operationally, is to look at some of that good practice. Now, what we've seen from some of those other councils is this new use of a separate independent commissioner panel. And so what is being proposed here, and again, this is to avoid any concerns about transparency, about accountability and about bias, is to, through a registrations of interest or expressions of interest process, call for applicants to go on to an independent hearings panel. What we're proposing in the report is that a group of council staff, so led by the Chief Operating Officer, the Manager of Consent Solutions and the lead RMA advisor, plus 2 iwi representatives would form an evaluation panel, and they would consider all of those registrations of interest with the view that they would bring back to council, and so this is the political involvement, some recommendations for council to approve and appoint a panel of 10 independent commissioners. So this way we've included within the report some general criteria, but it's really a case of professionalising or extremely looking at picking highly skilled commissioners to operate on this council's behalf in evaluating resource consents. So we just, the last sort of boxes I had here was just around the role and the relationship then to that RMA Policy Committee. So one of the things is that the Chief Operating Officer would be the person who would determine whether it was one independent commissioner who would hear each resource consent or whether there would be a panel involved. Now, the judgment there would be to look at what was required, the type of resource consent application, and see which of the independent panel members had the right skills or availability, or whether they needed to have multiple independent commissioners to hear an application if it was particularly complex. But the relationship that would have then is that would be reported on a regular basis to the RMA Policy Committee, so that they can see the application of their policies being undertaken by those independent commissioners. So there is a policy check back up to that RMA committee. So, councillors, that's the crux of what has been presented to you in this report. Recommendation 2 of the report, councillors, establishes the RMA Policy Committee. In the back of the report is the terms of reference and delegations for that new committee, and also the date is included when the statutory hearings committee would cease and the new RMA Policy Committee would come into effect. It also sets out in recommendations 3 to 6 the process for council to initiate the registrations or expressions of interest process. It establishes the panel to evaluate those applications that come in, and also the reporting back process to council for you to appoint them. And it also picks up on the process then of council having to assign the delegations to those independent commissioners to operate on your behalf in hearing of those resource consents. So that's the way we have the recommendations broken up. My apologies, it does extend over several pages, but hopefully my explanation around the diagram has provided a basic understanding of what we're trying to achieve through this proposal. Happy to answer any questions.
Yes, thank you very much, JP. Before I open up the report for discussion, at the local government conference that I attended recently, at the RMA workshop, the hearings processes for RMA came under obviously heavy discussion. And one of the main points that was brought up that the processes were onerous, time-consuming and expensive. So with the separation that you've shown up here, will that address at least some of the concerns that were raised there?
I think there's a fundamental concern about the RMA.
That was a big discussion
in itself. I suppose what we're seeking to achieve here is the fact that it potentially will only be one independent commissioner who will hear any application, and hopefully extremely experienced commissioners. So we're hoping that may enable us to see this process move more quickly, and potentially, and certainly expectation will be to reduce the cost for applicants through this process as well. And that's certainly been the case from Hamilton and from Auckland's experience. They also sort of have expressed the view that there was comfort provided through the independent commissioners for a number of applicants. So that was a confidence thing that had also come through as part of the feedback in that process.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to now open up the report for discussion. And Councillor Kent, then Your Worship, then Councillor Sharank.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I assume we're taking questions first before we get into debate? Thank you. My first question, JP, is you mentioned there that there were only 8 comments against in the submissions for the Rotorua plan. Can you actually point out to me where there was a question in the submission document asking people whether they were happy at all with the RMA, and are you ignoring the 857 submissions that said they didn't want a bar of the entire thing, and the 1,370 petition signatures that said exactly the same?
Thank you. Yes, actually would like to comment on, yes. Oh, sorry, Jeff. Beg your pardon, CEO.
Through you, Chair. Councillor, I think it would be inappropriate for JP to be able to comment on the broader numbers that you're talking about. JP has indicated the number of specific comments that pertain to the RMA. I don't see it would be appropriate for JP to be able to comment further on general matters of feedback that were not specific to the RMA process.
So, in fact, JP's comments on those, the significance of those so-called comments is totally superfluous. Right, now my next question concerns the so-called reduction in costs that are taking place, claimed for Auckland. Everyone I've spoken to in Auckland said the cost of consents has risen dramatically.
Relevance to this, please.
I'm
Relevance to
asking
this.
the question of the paper that we've put before us by council staff that is making wild statements that are not supported by fact or evidence.
Councillor Kent, you will modify, please, your tone and attitude when you are speaking and asking a question of the councillors. I will not indulge disrespectful behaviour in this chamber while I'm in the chair. Please take notice of that. So put your question respectfully, please. Thank you, Councillor Shirang. I'm in the chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just taking a step back to the 8 comments as well. Councillor, as I mentioned in describing what was on the board, the 8 comments were seen as being pretty fundamental to the concerns. Now, the fact that there was only 8 does not in any way detract from the issue that was raised, and as I say, it's formed part of the fundamental thinking that's gone into how we've proposed this. So I totally acknowledge that there is a bunch of general comments, but the specifics were very important to how we considered this proposal going forward, particularly around cost, concerns over transparency and concerns over potential bias or a view of potential bias. So that certainly underpins what's being proposed to you at the moment. Councillors, in regard to consent costs out of Auckland, I specifically asked and we had feedback on the cost of commissioners and commissioner time. So I can't comment on overall costs of consents out of Auckland because that's not specifically what I asked. I asked about this part of it. Now, whether that's relating to their new plan or their consent processes or anything like that, as I'm not clear, what I've focused on here is the cost of commissioner time and the involvement of commissioners as a cost within that total hearing cost. So if there's been changes in Auckland more general, I can't comment on this. This was very much related to that aspect which relates specifically to what's important to us, which is this going to cost us more or less in regard to commissioners and commissioner time for hearings. So this is why I've kept it quite narrow. So that was the feedback I obtained from Auckland.
One further question, Councillor Kent. Worship.
JP, just a question. This does reflect what we decided to park the RMA decision and focus on it afresh with new eyes. The second box down below about the consent hearing panels, you mentioned about the Chief Operating Officer deciding the independent commissioner. Is there any council law oversight so that we have the confidence as a community that there is council law oversight on that commissioner who was appointed for that case? Because we just need the confidence that we've chosen the right one that fits the sort of community of interest that we understand and we represent.
Certainly, Your Worship, and possibly I didn't explain it well enough. The 2 comments off the side of the diagram on the right-hand side. So what I saw that RMA Policy Committee, so under Councillor Hunt, was really there to make sure that they clarify for the Chief Operating Officer the sort of the rules around selecting commissioners and where they'll be used. So that was that policy on use of skilled commissioners, so e.g. the iwi involvement, or the example I had is that you might end up with an independent commissioner who may have a professional engineering background as well. And that might be a relevant skill base if, for example, that was an independent commissioner who was looking at resource consent around sewage schemes, for example. So something that's highly engineering technical versus something that was more planning orientated. So that would be that RMA committee's role to give some guidance through some policy to the Chief Operating Officer. So as you see there, commissioners appointed by Council, Chief Operating Officer for each hearing. I probably should have had a back arrow back up. So that RMA Policy Committee therefore has a monitoring responsibility. So every quarter there should be a report going back to that RMA Policy Committee, which gives some confidence to elected members and certainly that policy committee as to the choices that the Chief Operating Officer has applied in selecting those commissioners against those criteria, so that there's some sort of accountability that the commissioners are being used appropriately and the ones with the right skills are being applied to the different resource consent applications.
Yes, certainly.
I'd love to see that arrow going back, because then that's the community confidence in the process. And the other is the place of those that, so I understand the policy committee there, but others who have done their training. So we're talking about succession planning always, you know. Do they have observer status at any hearing so that they can come in and learn? Because I see the criteria says that you may require 3+ years of experience. So for them to get that experience and for us to be assured that we've got a succession plan, how does that fit the two boxes?
Your Worship, that's an extremely good question, and really we saw the view here, and it is important to recognise that RMA Policy Committee is quite small, so we probably do need to have in place the trained commissioners available to observe and to gain an understanding of what's being undertaken in that space, in case for any reasons there is a need to change or there is a change in the committee structure, or post, obviously, next election. Councillors may be unsuccessful, and we're lucky if we have a pool of commissioners that would then be able to step up and step into that commissioner to replace any who were unsuccessful or vice versa. So your comment about succession planning and involving all of our trained commissioners, at least in making sure they have an understanding of what is being processed through that RMA Policy Committee is important. Again, that was one of the factors that did focus my mind again back onto the numbers within that RMA Policy Committee. But as I said, the concern I had there was if you tried to increase the number of councillors involved in that committee as a training ground or to maintain the knowledge base directly, you impose a cost on applicants around plan changes and variations. So I think your suggestion about making sure we recognise succession planning and involve people in observing or making sure that we're not leaving people with accreditation out of discussions is quite important for the succession planning and for the continuity of this council.
Thank you. Councillor Sherink.
Chair, an explanation to begin with on my own position. My renewal came up in the middle of the district plan hearings. There was no way that I could have sat that paper and attended to that, as well as gone through the very onerous process of the district plan, which I was chairing. So I chose not to sit at that time. I have since decided that I shall not sit. And in view of this paper, I'm very pleased I didn't waste my time. The problem for me is that if we look at the recommendations here, and particularly with number 4, it takes away from the elected representatives any involvement at all in shortlisting those 10 commissioners. You say it comes to council at the end, but what can council do but rubber stamp it because they have not been part of the process of eliminating people and making a short list. I find it unbelievable that we have 2 Taura members and 3 staff on that appointment body and no councillors at all. That is a nonsense. It is an insult to governance in this city. And I have had a discussion with JP last night. I was very open about it because I was quite shocked when I read that number 4. You cannot take away that right from your elected people and hand to 2 independent people and 3 staff that ability to appoint your commissioners. And I do have a question as well. How do you get iwi? Because I understood they want to be on the hearings itself, not sitting aside in an appointment of commissioners or sitting up here as one person on a policy committee. So if the, what is he called, the council operating officer is choosing the commissioner or commissioners for a hearing, and let's face it, that's the main thing that people trained in resource management should be doing. They're not going to learn a lot sitting up here in the policy committee because anyone can read. You don't need to be qualified to do that. The main factor is that hearings committee. So how do you get that iwi person on the hearing which they have asked for?
Thank you, Councillor Sharank. The involvement of councillors in the selection, I think that came through, so if you can respond to that and the other points that Councillor Sharank raised. Thank you, JP.
The issue Councillor Sarank raised is an important one, and in putting together that panel to evaluate those applicants that come through that registrations of interest process, and I certainly understand Councillor Sarank's point of view about direct involvement. My comment had been that comes up to council. Now that's a question of adequacy for you as an elected body, and Councillor Sarank has certainly raised the issues at this stage. They've missed the discussion, and so they're in a position where, yes, you still have the power to not appoint some of those people, or to choose to say, hey, you haven't got it right. But it's difficult if you're not involved directly. So I can certainly understand that concern. But for me, it was a case of saying, well, if we bring councillors onto that panel, they're also sort of double voting in effect because they're involved in that selection and then at the council approval table. But that's a call I think is an important one for you to make as elected members. The second question related very much to the fundamental issue that was raised in some of those submission points, some of those 8, which was that concern about bias and determination coming through. So in talking to iwi representatives about that, the view here within that independent commissioner panel was not to see a separation of tasks. There wasn't a view that there should be an iwi rep or a number of iwi appointed representatives on the panel, so that as if they were a separate body. It was a view that all 10 needed to receive that endorsement from Te Arawa through that selection process, so that they could all sit independently and provide that. So there was the confidence from Te Arawa that they'd been involved in selecting all 10, and that they met a range of criteria. So it wasn't a case of saying, look, there's 5 Te Arawa members and there's 5 Te Arawa appointed commissioners, and there's not 5 general appointed commissioners, because then you're in a very difficult situation where really if you wanted to make sure you covered both perspectives, you need one of each at every hearing process. So this was a way of saying, look, if you're involved at the outset in making sure that these independent professional commissioners can take a Māori worldview into their deliberations, as well as all of their other professional skills and qualifications, that there is no need to segregate out that advice. So this was a way of saying that's the basis for the confidence behind that panel as a professional body, so it receives the Te Arawa endorsement in that way. So that's at the individual consent level, and as I said, the key for Te Arawa is to be at the table to discuss the land use rules, the strategic policy as the right place, and hence the separation between those 2 committees or 2 groups.
Thank you, JP. That's quite clear, your explanation. Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Do I get the feeling that the COO, which Mr. Foster, right? He gets to appoint the commissioners. So the rest of us elected members have no say in it.
Councillors, you appoint the commissioners to go on to the panel. on a consent by consent basis as applications come in. They're processed through our processing team, the manager of consent solutions downstairs, so Paul Spurtle and his team. They receive the applications, they look at the complexity and the detail of those applications, and they would talk to the Chief Operating Officer about the availability of commissioners to hear individual hearings, and at which point, against the criteria set by that RMA Policy Committee, they would appoint an appropriate commissioner to hear that hearing or to hear that consent. So that's the way it's processed. So the view is that it is operationalised. So the appointment comes up for this council with Te Arawa support to establish that panel of 10, and then how they're used on a case-by-case or a consent-by-consent basis is undertaken at a decision-making at an officer level with the check and balance back to your RMA Policy Committee. So that's the oversight of elected members.
As a follow-up, is the present system broken? If it's not broken, why are we changing it?
Through you, Madam Chair, I suppose I come back to the three drivers that we've looked at as to why we are proposing to change. So I mentioned the good practice information and the guidance we've received, particularly around things like streamlining the speed and efficiency of getting to a hearing and to undertaking that processing, the potential to reduce costs, and the operational transparency of that selection process. I think you also have to recognise we're in a unusual situation, having moved from moving from a proposed district plan to an operative district plan, where our elected members have been intimately involved in making those decisions around that plan. So certainly in the near horizon, there's certainly a potential for people to say, "Gosh, I'm suggesting something different," which only within a year, a number of elected member commissioners here were involved in taking it down a certain track. So there is a potential for some applicants to view that as being a risk or a potential for bias. So that's the good practice guidance or question that I raised. Your other question as to why are we changing this is that we did take a decision to support the Te Arawa proposal. So it's how we give recognition to what they had asked for. And I've talked a bit about delaying the decision on direct Te Arawa involvement, addressing the key issues raised in the submissions around transparency, accountability and potential bias and cost. So those have been driving into this discussion as well. And also the philosophical separation that we've undertaken within this organisation of policy and strategy from operational delivery. So those were the reasons why we have the opportunity, I believe, to improve what we currently have and reflect the decisions we've already taken around the Te Arawa partnership. So it's not a case of saying, is it broken? It's a case of saying things have changed and there's an opportunity to improve it still further through these adjustments.
Thank you, JP. I'll ask the CEO if he wants to make a comment, but the councillors, there are a number of you that want to speak, so I am getting through the list. So don't be anxious. Yes, Jeff.
Through you, Chair. It's a very good question about the RMA process, and I think nationally there is scrutiny on the RMA process. Government is extremely interested in asking questions about how can we develop increased confidence in the decisions made, how can we increase transparency, and how can we actually drive a cost-efficient outcome. So that's what government is paying attention to, and that is certainly what Auckland and Hamilton have actually looked to with regards to the redesign of their approach. The transparency, the confidence and outcome they see as actually being enhanced through the use of independent, non-politically aligned commissioners, and that is being strongly supported by a range of developers both in Auckland and Hamilton to that end. That underlies, if you like, some of the key parts that JP is outlining.
Thank you for that. Councillor Donaldson. Yes, I have got you on the list. Others were before you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And look, I'd endorse what the Chief Executive just said, having listened to the speech on the RMA from the Employers and Manufacturers Association at the LGNZ conference. But, JP, I had a question around the role of the iwi Consultative Committee in processes going forward. So does this flowchart obviate the need for that committee, or are they still there as a filter for consents?
They're actually part of, through you, Madam Chair, they're actually part of the initial application process. So this is at the pointy end of considering a lodged application. That consultative committee you've referred to is actually one of the steps back from that point. So after an application has been properly lodged, for those councillors who are not aware of what happens during that process, is particularly for major land use or ones relating to water or sites of significance, the manager of consent solutions, in talking to applicants, will evaluate some of the pre-application information that's been presented and may suggest that there's a discussion that needs to be undertaken with particular iwi groups or hapu or representatives in a particular area. Now that's coordinated, and the advice as to who needs to be contacted is undertaken through this panel that gives us some support and direct advice. So that is almost at a the early lodgement or pre-lodgement stage. So no, it does not change that, and I think there's certainly a view from Te Arawa that that's important, and it gets the conversations and the engagement at the right level before it comes through to a hearing process.
Thank you. Councillor Gould, Councillor Sturt, Councillor McVicker, and then Councillor Webber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, JP, for your report. My question is concerning page 26, which is up on your screen up there. The RMA Policy Committee, you've got plus one iwi appointed commissioner. Are you stating it as Te Arawa, or are you stating it as any person of Maori descent of the Maori tribes in New Zealand?
Councillor, what we've looked at there, and you can see there, it's the iwi involvement through the Te Arawa board. So that would be a decision as to who the Te Arawa board recommends to council. Now that might be someone within Te Arawa, or it may not. The key element there is that certainly that is the one absolute threshold that must exist in that space, is that they are commissioner accredited. So that would be the basis of any recommendation that would come through from the Te Arawa board. And as you're aware, it's still council's decision. If you recall, some of the discussion that was undertaken during the Te Arawa proposal and the hearings process, and then the subsequent decision meeting on the 26th, is that that very specific wording related to council making a decision as to the skills, knowledge and competencies of anyone they choose to appoint to a committee. So whoever Te Arawa puts forward would have to meet, in this case, a minimum requirement to be an accredited commissioner, and as to why they would be putting forward someone who is Te Arawa or non-Te Arawa, that's a decision for Te Arawa to make through their board.
Follow up, sorry. Can we point out that we're talking about the Te Arawa board of 14 appointed people from the Te Arawa area, not the Lakes Te Arawa Trust Board?
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Maybe I'm not being clear enough. This is the proposed new Te Arawa board elected by Te Arawa, which was the basis of the Te Arawa proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Gould, can I just say that your question was a good one, and all around the country, commissioned iwi are going to other tribal areas at the invitation of tangata whenua, because they have expert knowledge in certain areas to assist them in their hearings. So it's a good question, and it's not unusual. So kia ora to your question. Councillor Sturt.
Chair, I'm rather concerned about recommendation 1. I think it would be foolhardy of us to adopt recommendation 1 today, because some of the issues that even Her Worship raised have got considerable bearing on where we move forward. Because in my experience around here, we've been pretty well served by our hearings committee when it's been required. And in response to Mr. Williams's, the messages...
You're talking about recommendation
One.
2.2, aren't you?
Point two, the
Thank
whole
you.
lot actually. Yeah, in rebuttal of what our Chief Executive Officer said, I think the government's concerned about costs. The spread of applications and getting the bureaucracy out of the resource consent process. I believe this is adding bureaucracy. I'm quite happy with the top one. I'm quite happy with the RMA Policy Committee. I believe the Mayor's questions about succession and continuity are valid. But the Policy Committee, what I'm concerned about, Madam Chair, is the continuity of the application of the policy. You're going to have 10 independent people interpreting the policy when an application comes in, and that's what worries me, with no political accountability, none of the intellectual experience that the people who have made the policy are going to be at the end of its application of that particular policy. That's what concerns me more than anything. I mean, all very well and good that there's 10 well-qualified independent people, but at the end of the day, we around this table are politically accountable to our community on resource management, and we can't sign that off to anybody else. We will be responsible. And the issues that others have raised about the selection panel, I mean, it shouldn't be a staff member who handpicks who should. I mean, if we get an application from Ngāti Whakaue, certainly Councillor Hunt, Councillor Weber, who have got experience on the policy, plus years and years of experience in terms of, and Councillor Sarang for that matter, on the application of the Resource Management Act and the policies surrounding that pertain to Rotorua, they should have a say. And there should be some political input in terms of when these consents are required. So I could raise a whole lot of issues. I don't think I agree with Councillor Kent for once, that I don't think the issue of cost has been addressed. I believe this is going to be more costly, because you've got to have 10 people standing by for a call-up, and the logistics of keeping that 10 group together and the continuity of their application.
No, you were debating actually at present, and I think good points are being raised, so thank you for your, it's not a point of order. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Please continue.
Obviously, Councillor Gould has a greater contribution to make, so I'll relent to him.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McVicker. Councillor.
Number of questions that I'm making a valid contribution to this debate. You should apologise to me, Councillor Gould. That was absolutely uncalled for. We are debating the issue, and everybody else around this table has raised debating points, including the Mayor, including Councillor Sarang, etc., etc. And I believe this is so important that we get it right. And I'll finish, after that rude interruption, I'll finish by saying I think the timing is wrong. This needs more development work. I will not be supporting in its current term.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Councillor McVicker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I must admit, I certainly concur with the previous speaker, and he was rudely interrupted by Councillor Gould. But I would start by saying that when I read this recommendation, I must admit I was somewhat flabbergasted with the significant changes that are being proposed here. And I will not try and dwell on what other people have said, but to find that this traditional role of councillors is no longer going to be the case, and as Councillor Stewart has just well explained, the fact that people who do not have any political accountability, as councillors, if this proceeds, us councillors will have no role whatsoever in implementing the district plan review. We might have 2 members, sure, involved, but the rest of us, we're elected by the public to govern, and the governance has been taken office. In fact, it almost strikes me that we councillors have been bypassed because Te Aroha want this to happen. And I really, really struggle with the fact that that's even suggested and even got this far to be debated around this table today. I likewise would suggest this decision be deferred. I think the Chief Executive made reference to the fact in Hamilton, the developers in Hamilton had certainly concurred, I gather, with what was happening there. Have we approached our developers in town and asked them what do they think? Well, I can tell you no. I just spoke to 2 of them this morning. So, no, we've got a long way to go, and I could spend a lot more time asking them many questions, like the conflict of interest that I would, suggest is going to happen, because of the 10 members on the panel, no doubt iwi will be 3 or 4 of them, and that goes back to the fact that last December we signed off 1 out of 3. Now there's likely to be 4 or 5 or 6 out of 13. Let's face it. So there's all these questions I have to ask. I won't dwell on any longer, other than to say we cannot sign this off today. There's a lot more work needs to be done, cost in particular. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McVicker. Councillor Webber and then Councillor Kent again.
Madam Chair, I just had a question on the 8.1 with the financial budget considerations, and you talk about the tender process to fix the hourly rates for panel members. So currently, and I'll just bring this up, currently I'm not sure if every councillor knows, when people sit on resource consents, we receive an hourly rate that is set nationally. But when we have an independent commissioner with specialist skills like engineering or etc., I don't know what they get per hour, but I guess they say I want this much, and I know that we pay them significantly more plus disbursements, and so that costs this council a lot of money when we have an independent commissioner, particularly with specialist skills. So I just wondered, how will we manage that, because it's not quite clear in this. Certainly, so I want to know if we go through a tender process, does that mean that the whole 10 would get the same rate, and then they might be picked on their skills for each application, or would they have an independent tender process for each person and expect more? So I'm just looking for fairness and consistency, and for us as a council to have some idea of the cost implications, because that's been raised by several councillors today, and I think that's really, and it can get huge. I mean, I know if the 3 of us current councillors hadn't sat on the district plan and effectively undersold ourselves and got about $10 an hour, it would have cost this council a lot more money. And so, we did that willingly, we knew that, but I think we just need to know what the long-term cost potentially could be. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the process that has been involved for Hamilton and Auckland through this has, during the expressions or registrations of interest process, has been also to, in effect, identify an hourly rate for commissioners. So that becomes an approved or an agreed hourly rate. What has been the experience in those other locations? And just picking up on Councillor Sturt's comments about the panel waiting in the wings, in effect, our approved panel and our delegated panel becomes like a preferred supplier group. So they're approved by us, they're delegated by us, their hourly rate has been determined through that registrations of interest process, and therefore they're available when they're available to sit on panels. So again, it doesn't mean they're just sitting around waiting for work from Rotorua Lakes Council. They have their normal business, but we have an agreed, and I like to think of it as preferred supplier status because we've approved them through that. And what has been come through from Auckland and Hamilton is for that base of being involved with each of those 2 councils, we've seen a substantial reduction in their normal hourly rates to be part of that panel process. So that's what we would be expecting to occur here. And councillors, your view of the cost, you're absolutely right. There's a statutory set amount for councillor commissioners on hearings, which is generally lower than what commissioners received. Obviously, the difference there is the potential for us to be using one commissioner as opposed to, as we operate with elected members, which is 3. So that changes the cost factor in that space. I just think it's important. I just refer back to a statement made by Councillor Sturt as well, and it's an important one in this discussion. Councillor Sturt made a comment about the need or the view of a political head around consenting. I think we're into some very difficult, and the reason why we've got this fundamentally separated is that the political head is about the policy and about the direction and the establishment of the rules. The actual implementation of that rules on a consent by consent basis is in a quasi-judicial type function. So the political hat for anyone who sits as a commissioner has to be well and truly set aside, because those decisions are challengeable through the Environment Court. And so anyone who is RMA qualified would have certainly had it well and truly drummed into them that the importance of following the legislative requirements and understanding how to assess a consent. So I think that's the importance of understanding the view that in setting that independent panel, you are putting it into an operational status to implement the rules you have set. And it is a quasi-judicial space, and it needs to be done very carefully. And any concerns over political bias is what we're avoiding through this kind of process. The other concern too about saying there is a number of iwi appointed reps within the 10, as I tried to say, that's not intended to be the case. What is intended to be the case here is that jointly with Te Arawa, we have appointed 10 independent commissioners that both the Council and Te Arawa view as being credible enough to receive and process or sit in a hearing on any application. There may be some specialist skills which would be a wider panel, but there's certainly not an us or them. So that's the fundamental concern about the independence and transparency of this panel. So I can't overemphasise that point enough, councillors.
Certainly.
Right, Madam Chair, if I may. So then the other question is the panel. I just wondered from the Auckland and Hamilton cases that you've looked at, so do they go out wider so anyone can apply from anywhere to be on that group? And I'm assuming this would apply here, including councillors who are currently RMA trained. They can't apply? Oh, okay. If they've got some of the skills.
They can go.
Look, that's a difference. We're saying this is an independent panel. Now, outside of your council or role, you are an accredited RMA commissioner. So you could put yourself forward for Hamilton's process or any other council that did it as well. I don't believe we could exclude you from putting as a private individual, qualified private individual in a consulting space to put forward your name to be considered into that registrations of interest process.
There are a number of councillors who are. That they could put their name forward if they chose to.
They could.
For
yes.
Here or Rotorua
Yes.
or Hamilton or
Yes.
Auckland.
That's correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, councillors, the other thing too is, yep, and that would be through an independent appointed process. So what we're trying to avoid is the fact that there's an automatic view that we've got to use elected members within that. So the preference is that this is a completely independent board, separated from our policy function, but as individuals we can't prevent you from registering. But I think the issue we'd have there is that it probably starts to fundamentally undermine what we're seeking to achieve through this process. Yeah. Councillors, again, if you recall in the paper, we did highlight some of the criteria we would want to investigate. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and obviously some of them are minimums, whilst other of them might be an evaluation that the panel undertakes, and that's detailed on page 31, about halfway down the page. So obviously they would have to be Commissioner accredited. There would be some value in being chair accredited, because in that basis that person could sit individually to receive a hearing or lead a panel. a number of years as a commissioner, a demonstrated understanding of Treaty of Waitangi, understanding of our local district. So again, that local district question is important, understanding our district plan and any other specialist skills. So those are some of the basic criteria we would see forming part of that discussion within that evaluation panel. So that's, for us, hopefully addresses some of the concerns about knowledge of our plan and how it's been operated, knowledge of our district and the relationships within our district as well.
Thank you very much, JP. We have had a lot of questions. I know that sometimes at times there's been a bit of a blur between questions and debate, but I'm now going to open it up for debate. Thank you. Yes, I know that there's been a bit of a blurring of the lines there. Some of the questions turned into debate, but I still think there's some way to go. Councillor Kent, then Councillor Bentley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As a qualified RMA Commissioner, and as a Commissioner who's also completed the chairing meetings course held by the Local Government New Zealand, and who has, in the past 12 months, sat on precisely, I think it's 3 hearings, which basically says to me that this council is probably doing, what, half a dozen hearings a year? We are facing a scenario here where we're expecting a Tiaroa board that's not even going to be formed until early next year, and all this to be put in place for possibly 3 hearings before the next election. I think that is a pointless waste of time and expense. I also object most strongly, as an elected councillor, to being prevented from having any participation whatsoever in the district plan matters of this council. I'm an elected councillor who's been elected to look after the interests of the people. I am being denied the opportunity to do that by council staff and by those that are in power on this council. I find that totally unacceptable. It's about time we got back to our proper roles around this council table. It is for councillors
No
to
lecturing,
determine.
please. No lecturing, please.
It is
You're going to debate the issue. Stay focused on the issue. No lecturing.
Okay, I'll move on to the issue of cost, which has been raised. I've had the experience, both as a commissioner and as someone who's paid for a commissioner in hearings, and so I understand how the system works. As an elected councillor, you get paid $80 an hour for the hours you actually spend on site or actually in the hearing. You don't get paid for the hours that you spend studying all the documentation or anything else. An independent commissioner, however, gets paid something in the vicinity of $180 per hour. Not only that, he gets paid for all his preparation time, all his travel time, and all his time considering afterwards and writing up the reports. So I fail to see how this can possibly be cost effective in any shape or form, and I wish to see figures on that to substantiate this claim from staff as to cost efficiencies. That basically sums up my case. I cannot support this. I find it totally abhorrent and a challenge to my right as a councillor to have a say on this council.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Councillor Bentley, then your worship.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering how much time you spent on planning this through you, Madam Chair, Mr. Gaston, because as recently as a couple of weeks ago, the ratepayers of Rotorua paid for Councillor Gould to go and do an accreditation course, which I congratulate him that he passed, which is now, you're basically saying that, yes, Councillor Gould, you can off with Councillor Bentley and Councillor Kent, toddle off to Hamilton and ply your wares there, because you're not going to be considered for Rotorua.
Thank you. Moving on to the Mayor, your worship.
Yes, thank you. I
This is
think
the
it's been a
debating
good...
part of it, thank you.
Yes, I think it's been a good discussion this morning. It's raised a few issues, but I am supportive of these recommendations. I've had my concerns answered. And I have been here at council meetings where we've talked about, and it was early in this council term, the need to professionalise the way in which we manage resource management consent hearings. And I think this next step in professionalisation, that those that did attend the conference heard that when you have people of the depth that I can see will be the commissioners with up to 3 years' experience, and that's no offence to those that have just undertaken their training, but that is not putting people who are experienced before applicants who expect to have a great deal of experience listening to their application. That's what I, as an applicant, would want to know. And I'd also be pleased to know that there are councillors who have undertaken and passed their training that are coming through, gaining more experience alongside councillors Hunt and Weber. So I've got no problem with the professionalisation of those commissioners. You can't be a newly graduated commissioner and put into some of the complex hearings that we heard about, especially with the issues of water that we are hearing are going to be faced as a council, and we've got some before us right now that are major issues that you have to have a great deal of understanding and experience. I've got no problem at all when I see that all strategy policy decisions of the RMA Policy Committee come to council. That's what I was elected to do, to hear the policy decisions that expert committee make and bring to us as council. We are the elected people, and we will there, like here, put in our input into policy decisions that come before us. That's what I was elected to do. I wasn't and didn't want to ever be a hearings commissioner. That's not a strength that I chose as a professional line of being an elected representative. So I've got no problem with this professionalisation. I have heard at this council table in the past that we were looking at more use of independent commissioners. Really, what we've got in the consent hearing panels is a stable of highly effective, well-trained and experienced professional council-appointed commissioners. And that's a good thing. That widens the base, it widens the experience of those that could come in from all over the country dealing with something that could be beyond the skills that we've got of our own elected members. So I've got no problem with that whatsoever, and I'm not threatened by that at all. Clearly around the country, if you're going to be an accredited commissioner, there is a certain undertaking in order to be an accredited commissioner. That's a career pathway. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing that we cross-pollinate around the country with that expertise. I've got no problem with that. I've had my question answered this morning about especially recommendation 3.4 about somebody moving that arrow so that we have elected members now involved in the commissioners appointed by the council chief operating officer. I think that needs to be changed, and I was pleased to hear, yes, that's a good idea. So I think we're making a bigger issue out of what's come before us, but this, make no bones about it, is a substantial change to how we used to run statutory hearings, and I used to be on that statutory hearings board when I was a previous councillor. So this is a substantial shift. I see it as professionalisation. I see it with council law oversight. And I was interested in the comment, if it's not broken, why fix it? And I think it takes me back to the Te Aroha Partnership, where we heard of decisions around Rotorua and Taniwha Springs. And quite frankly, when you read the judge's findings, if iwi had have been involved in the both at the pre-hearings and some of those decisions, we would never have got in the pickle that we did end up with massive costs to us as council and ratepayers. So this is a reflection of getting the right engagement by iwi at the right place in the decision making. It's what we intended to do with the Te Arawa model. And this was a paper I've been waiting to hear. All of us knew we were going to hear, and we were going to hear that we'd moved much more to an independent commissioner-led model with councillor oversight of setting the policy back to full council to sign off that policy. So I think it's perhaps we haven't populated or socialised this paper. It's complex. And it is a complex change in the way that we've always done business on this council. But the way we did business in the past didn't exactly give us the solutions for going forward that we as councillors were elected to find. And I think this is a good solution to go forward with the right people at the right level of decision making. So I've got no problem supporting this at all today, and I hope those that were concerned can see that this is the next iteration and the next step that this council undertook when we were elected, to look at everything we do to make sure, have we got the right people involved? Are we including those people at the engagement level that we wanted to? No, we clearly weren't in the past. And this is just moving us that next step. So I have no problem with this paper and the recommendations at all.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Tapsell, Councillor Sharank, then Councillor Sturt. And then Councillor Cunt.
Thank you. First of all, thank you, JP. This is a really, really well detailed, well-informed report, and I do really appreciate the research and consideration you've taken of not only the submissions but also the feedback from the community. Like other councillors, I was at the Local Government New Zealand conference, and I sat in on part of the RMA discussion and issues, and it is quite clear that those issues will only be solved by example. They will not be solved by opinion, they will be solved by example, and that is why I appreciate that this has also been themed from the research and feedback you have gotten from Hamilton and Auckland. So this is currently, in a way, already in practice. This is not new, it is just new to us. It is very complex, it is very scary, but I have confidence that this is actually the right move. Also, it reflects quite clearly what Te Arawa and what the community have asked for. On the pages 32, the one off the table, evaluation of options and get submission theme. So although you only had those 8 comments, you've actually gone through all of those submissions, and we have the themes there, the key issues, and the different options, and it shows that this option 1, which I support today, actually meets the most of those themes, whether they were for or against. Lastly, I suppose, as Jeff said as well, and as other councillors have said, this is an opportunity to bring more confidence and transparency. I do think, like the Mayor, that this was broken. This was a broken process, and that is shown through the amount of feedback that we got through the Te Arawa proposal, the amount of feedback and the history that we have had, and the huge costs that we have had. A comment which was about our right as a councillor. It is our role as a councillor to serve the wider community. And it is our wider community that was having to pay the costs for our mistakes, for ourselves getting ourselves in pickles. And I see this as a fair way that we can actually fix these processes, because at the end of the day, the future with our RMA processes and all of this can be better if we choose to do so, because we have the power to do so. The council has the power to do so, and it saddens me that people get confused with this whole power thing, and they're scared to share that with other people. But when they are the specialists in their area, perhaps it is a good idea to be well informed ourselves. So yeah, I think that this is really good, and it'll do so. It's just good practice, and really, when you look at the history and the significant costs we've had previously, this is a cost-efficient way to do things in a respectful manner to our wider community.
Kia ora, Councillor Tapsell. Councillor Sharank.
First of all, I must correct Councillor Tapsell. The costs incurred in those court cases to which he referred to had absolutely nothing to do with the Statutory Hearings Committee. They were not cases that came to us. They had nothing to do with the Resource Management Statutory Hearings Committee. Be mindful that the 5 qualified people you have here have the same qualification as your independent commissioners. There's no difference in the qualification. They just happen to be councillors who actually care about their district. And it's always been my opinion, and I still hold to that opinion, that local people should deal with local issues when it is at all possible, but not when there's a conflict of interest with council perhaps being the applicant. So I implore you, I cannot support this recommendation. I can tell you that the consultant that was used for one day during the district plan hearings, because we had a conflict of interest, the 3 of us, because we'd sat on a hearing for this particular area and made a decision, so they brought in a consultant for one day. He started at about 9:30 and he was finished at 4, and his charge was $2,500. So he is an independent commissioner, and you probably know who I'm talking about. So there's not enough detail here. This has been worked through by officers. We should have, in my opinion, workshopped it, really whiteboarded it, gone through it. What do we really want to do? I think it's premature to make a decision today, and if it lies on the table, I'll be very happy. But I do not believe we should make a decision today. There are too many unknowns, and costs is one of them. And, Your Worship, these independent commissioners, they have perhaps got not as much experience, some of them, as some of our commissioners here. Because you only get experience from sitting on hearings. That is the only way you get experience. You can sit on the upper part, we've got Hunt and Wepper. You can sit there and observe, but you're only talking policy. You're not talking the application of that policy. And indeed, if those 2 policy people have a district plan hearing to have, an adjustment to the district plan, then whatever decision they make is final. This council has no way can change it. Those 2 people under this paper have the absolute control of the district plan, because only those who hear it can make a decision. So I think there's a lot more work to be done on this paper.
Thank you, Councillor Sharank. Councillor Sturt.
Yeah, I would like to move actually that the recommendations 2 to 6 lay on the table for further development. Thank you, Councillor Gould. Now, Madam Chair, in speaking to the recommendation, I mean, why I want this to lay on the table is that it precludes the people who we've paid for to be trained. Yes, we've done the policy development. The community's had a say. It's gone to the Environment Court if needed, and it's come back and said, yes, you got this right, or no, you got that wrong, you need to change that, etc. But it's the application of those policies that's at issue for me. And the reality is, if we get 10 independent commissioners, whether they're from Rotorua or not, it's going to take them 12 months to actually understand the policies, and the interpretation of the policy could be at total odds as to what our trained people who develop the policy are put into practice. So, Madam Chair, I'm not coming here for a witch hunt. I supported the Te Arawa model, and don't throw that up as a smokescreen. What I'm wanting is the best results for Rotorua. I supported the Te Arawa and Te Arawa involved. End of story, move on. It didn't give an opportunity for us to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And regardless of what went on at local government conference, they're not always right either. But, Madam Chair, I believe it's about engagement with the community. 8 people's submissions aren't sufficient enough, in my view, to change down the path that we're heading. Accountability, politically, and the cost. The cost cannot be denied, what Councillor Rank has just said. I want to find solutions for Rotorua, not what's happening in Invercargill or Palmerston, North Auckland or Hamilton. I want to find what is the right solutions for the application of the Resource Management Act and Rotorua's district plan for Rotorua, to find Rotorua solutions for Rotorua problems. I have to agree with Councillor Bentley. I'm really finding this quite difficult, having to agree with Councillor Kent and Councillor Bentley in the same day. But I think the process is broken. I don't think this. I mean, we've gone through an exhaustive public consultation process with this. Why haven't we with this? This is absolutely doubly more important in terms of policy and the future and the economic growth and development of Rotorua than this is, and yet we've spent hours and hours and hours. And I'm proud to be part of that, and you are too, Madam Chair, and so is Councillor Tapsell, and you'll find out about this later. But this is even twice as important. And if we haven't got it right, I think I'm giving you the out to ask that the matter lay on the table, because I would, JP, it's no disrespect to the work that you've done, none whatsoever. We've just got to get it right. And if we need to workshop, Madam Chair, and do what we did with your choice week, Mrs. Nicholas and I met individually with different groups about the Your Choice campaign. We need to do that with this so we get it absolutely right, because there's plenty of angst around this table that we haven't got it right. So
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. I actually will put your motion. I'm going to put your motion right now. It has been moved by Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Gould, that the report lie on the table until a further meeting at some stage to workshop. No, because unless you're going to speak to this one here, I'm actually going to put this motion right now. No, I'm going to put the motion. I am going to put this motion. I want to test and to see otherwise, so we can proceed. So I am going to put that motion. All those in favour, it's up there, that this report lie on the table until a future meeting. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary?
Carried.
Can lie on the table. Just a moment, please. So all those in favour of this, the report lie on the table, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? It lies on the table.
Carried.
Yes.
Excellent. Yep. Correct. To get it right.
Your Worship, I think you have spoken this morning. Thank you, clearly. I will give Councillor Hunt. You haven't spoken this morning, Councillor Hunt. Thank you. And then I'm going to call this one to a conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to say initially that I hear the concern of my colleagues, and so that obviously this motion has arisen from that concern. And I think that it came up at the recent training that there is a concern. This is happening around the country, but it's happening for quite a good reason. One of the big concerns was the raising of standards of the training of commissioners. It changed from one provider to another one recently, and there was a degree of concern nationally that actually it wasn't tough enough, and so the lifting of the standards has been a really important step in that. I think that because we've going to allow it to lie on the table, we'll understand those costs and we'll all agree what we think is reasonable. And of those 10 who are selected, they'll know they're not going to get the rates that they normally get. So that's part of their commitment to be on that committee. There's not going to be 10 on each hearing, and I think that was a bit of a misunderstanding. There'll likely be 1 to 3. Okay. Well, I'm just clarifying that for some.
Councillor Hunt, perhaps we can delay your further
okay,
comments until we have our workshop.
Okay, just the last one, I think I would like to say is that it is a balance between independent and local knowledge. And it will highlight the ambiguities, if there are any, in our plan, and it will highlight the strengths, and it will put an enormous focus on the policy team, and I think that that will improve standards for everyone in the whole community. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Thank you very much, councillors, for the discussion this morning. I have found it very interesting, obviously, chairing. Obviously, that it's no longer business as usual, not only here, but all around the country. So thank you for the full and frank discussion this morning. I would like to raise a procedural matter, please, and ask, there is an item on the, excuse me, just let me get it correctly. The first item in our confidential section, I would like to raise an issue that be brought into the public, into this public session. The reason for that is it was in the public excluded session because we wanted to inform Rangi Wewehi of the decision that was taken at an appropriate time. This is a significant issue for them, so I would like to ask that we have a mover and a seconder that our first. Thank you, and we do have rangatira from Ngāti Rangiwewehi here to this morning, and it would be wonderful if you could stay, be with us, and we will bring this item from confidential into the open session. I need to vote. It was moved by Councillor Sturt, seconded by Councillor Gould. Thank you. That we move the confidential item, the resource. Sorry, let me get it. Thank you very much, Councillor Gould. What would I do without you? Sorry, I'm being a bit facetious there. Yes, the transfer of ownership of Taniwha Springs to Ngāti Rangiwewehi.
Confidential minutes.
Yes, it's only that item.
That I have moved that go into the public.
That's right. Yes, it's only that item. That the transfer of ownership of Taniwha Springs to Taniwha Springs to Ngāti Rangiwewehi. It's been moved by Councillor Sturt, seconded by Councillor Gould, that come now into the public session of Council today of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary. Thank you very much, councillors, for that. That is the only item. Yes, we'll see what we can do there. Thank you. And to our whanaunga, Ngāti Rangiwewehi, mōrera, tēnā koutou, nau mai haere mai. Kia ora tātou. Now, where am I? So could I have a mover and a seconder to receive the report, the transfer ownership of Taniwha Springs to Ngāti Rangiwewehi be received? Thank you, Councillor Sharank. It's been moved by Councillor Sharank, seconded by Councillor Hunt. All those in favour, please say aye. Thank you very much. I'd like to ask now our officers, I'm not sure which one. There's three handsome men up there, three of you up there to introduce the report. Kia ora.
Morena, Madam Chair, and morena, councillors. Tuatahi rā he mihi nei ki a tātou mo te rangi nei. Mo tēnei o tātou kaupapa. I'd just like to extend a warm welcome for my part to be able to, for the first time, to be able to assist in presenting a report to the full council this morning. Tuatahi rā he mihi nei ki a Ngāti Rangiwewehi. Nā koutou I tai pai ai. Me tēnā o tātou e noho ake nei mo te kaupapa. And also to welcome Ngāti Rangiwewehi and others who have gathered here for what is a significant take kaupapa for Ngāti Rangiwewehi. Kia ora tā. We have a team obviously here to be able to present, and I'll now hand it over to Dave. Kia ora tātou.
Madam Chair, just very briefly, I think councillors are well aware of the context around this paper, and I guess on the one hand it's a fairly simple property transaction that we're talking about, but on the other hand it's actually a pretty big step towards resolving what is really one of the longest standing and deepest felt grievances in the district. So really just in terms of a little bit of context around Taniwha Springs, and really the council is currently taking water from Taniwha Springs and has been doing so since the 60s. The current consent expires in 2018, and the Environment Court really has signalled there's no realistic chance of extending the consent beyond that time, except obviously with the agreement of Ngāti Rangiwiwihi. So we've been having a number of ongoing discussions about the potential of extending arrangements beyond 2018, but that's really a separate issue in terms of having a think about, can we come up with options that will actually work for both parties. But what we've really come to is the fairly obvious realisation is, regardless of which scenario is followed, whether the consent ends and the water take ends in 2018, or whether it continues beyond in partnership, the issue of land ownership needs to be resolved. And I think I floated it with council probably a month or so ago, saying, why not move now? And so this paper really is saying, look, we've got an opportunity here. I think to do the right thing, there are mechanisms well used and available to ensure the council's interests, at least until 2018, in taking water are protected. Fairly simple easement or lease arrangements can be negotiated, and certainly it'll be a condition of any transfer that at least until 2018 that right to take water is protected. But there are plenty of mechanisms to do that, regardless of ownership. So really this is putting it to you to say we've got a pretty big opportunity here to do the right thing.
Thank you. Any comment further from the table there? Thank you. Councillor Schrank.
Chair, in regard to the recommendation number 4, it speaks of either at Taniwha Springs or elsewhere. Can officers update us on the cost of that alternate supply proposal, and whether the 1.075 million that came as part of the settlement can be used towards that possible new supply if we can't reach agreement?
The point of
Excuse me, just before you answer, I've just had a message to say that this is being streamed, and so if we can perhaps move our thing so that the people who are watching actually can hear clearly, because it's not quite so clear, they're having difficulty hearing. So I guess we've got to accommodate some people who are at home listening or watching.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Councillor, the money that was committed by ministers really as part of the treaty settlement package was to enable the council to at least cover some of the costs of moving out of Taniwha Springs. So the assumption at that stage was that there's no way the water take will continue beyond 2018, and that was really recognition from the Crown that they would make a contribution. But my understanding is that the $1 million is only ever going to be a contribution, and the cost of moving will be significantly more than that. But Councillor, we've also had an indication.
I'm asking, Madam Chair, if I may. We did have a figure that we had a couple of years ago, and I wish to know if that figure has increased or is about the same. I think it was about 4.2 million.
Yes, that's right.
Through you, Madam Chair. Current estimates are around about 3.5.
Thank you. Yes.
Is that 3.5 inclusive of the settlement money or exclusive?
We always use our terminology in terms of cost. So the total cost is estimated at 3.5.
Thank you. Your Worship.
Well, I certainly support this recommendation, and I'd like to thank you, Henry, because this is quite a threshold to come back to council, and it's nice to see that we've got Rangi Kahiki and Toro here in the gallery today, because this is showing a new way forward with Rangiwiwihi that has taken some courage and some leadership, but also council now showing what a partnership can achieve when we sit together around the table and work through these issues. I think that all of these recommendations I support. It gives us a way forward. It gives us a way forward to work on finding the preferred option. And that's very, very positive. So from what was a stalemate, we've now got a way forward with this recommendation today. And that's very significant. And I'm glad it's an open council today. So I have utmost pleasure in supporting these recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Donaldson, Sturt and Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I absolutely accept that this is the right thing to do. And what I was going to say, if I could have spoken to the previous matter, was around the issue of costs. And so when the writing is on the wall, you know, it's time to move on. And the costs that developers are concerned about are not just the costs of employing commissioners, it's the costs of delay. And if we delay, then costs will just be ratcheted up.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for that. You're correct. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So with this one, I think that the costs have been identified for an alternative options, and those costs are inclusive of the Crown contribution. And I think, you know, we need to get on with the task now, otherwise those costs will just continue to increase. So I'm fully supportive of the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Councillor Sturt.
Yeah, on page 54 of the papers that we've been given, it states quite clearly, and seeking approval from ministers to use the 1.075 million to assist in the restoration work at the Taniwha Springs. So if agreement can't be reached, the removal of all our gear and equipment and our pump house and all the other matters on that site will be covered by the 1.075 as I take it. But Madam Chair, I'm delighted that we've reached this point. Like Her Worship, this has been a festering sore in the local community out there for many years, and the ability of government and the Minister of Treaty Settlements to actually recognise this issue and seek some redress is appropriate. This for me is significant for the Ngāti people and for Awaho, but the issue that I'm now concerned about is finding that source. But also I don't want to close the door on meaningful discussions in the spirit of cooperation with the people of Awaho, who I believe may be receptive. I don't know, because I haven't been party to those negotiations. Because we will not only face the issue of access to Taniwha Springs, which the Environment Court has said will end in 2018, there is also the issue that is also pending, is the use by Kaharoa and Hamarana of the Hamarana Springs, which is another issue further downstream. So I think in terms of good faith cooperation with the people of Awaho, they are due the respect that this treaty claim has resolved. We have basically had free use of their water for the last 30 or 40 years, and I think in the spirit of cooperation and sound principles of negotiation, we should engage with Ngāti Rangiwiwi as soon as possible, because the cost for the alternatives, from my point of view, are prohibitive. So I hope staff will take that cue with your involvement as well, and we can move forward as a community together, recognising and respecting the wishes of the people of Awaho.
Thank you, Councillor Sturt. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In principle, I'm quite happily in favour of what is being suggested. My question is in terms of the council officer's assessment of significance, and as to whether in reality, because we are dealing with what is a principal asset of this council, whether we should dot the I's and cross the T's and actually explain to the public why we are recommending this, but actually seek consultation so that we get the proper approval of the people to hand over this asset which belongs to the people. It doesn't belong to these councillors. So perhaps the Chief Executive could comment on that, please.
Henry, thank you.
Through you, Madam Chair. Councillor, as we've been going through the process, and particularly when we were going through the process of assessing the significance, the real interest of the council that we identified was the ongoing right to take the water, initially through to the end of the consenting period, 2018, and then, if with agreement, as Councillor Sturz talked about, beyond that as well. And so we're entirely confident that a mechanism such as an easement will protect the council's interest in that. And that's really the interest we've identified and the mechanism we've identified to protect it. So I don't think we need to go further. And I suppose it's worth pointing out that even when places like Tokarangi Forest were returned to CNI iwi, they were returned with ownership going to CNI, but with easements over the council's existing rights to take water and obviously spray the effluent in there as well. So it's a well-established mechanism. Similarly in Auckland, with the return of a lot of land up there to the Tamaki Collective, Watercare have now simply taken on a whole range of easements. And again, I don't think with any additional public consultation, because it was that right that can be protected through that mechanism.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt and then Councillor Gould.
Thank you. I support this recommendation up there, and I think from Council's point of view, it shows a willingness to move forward and take our responsibilities seriously and respectfully. And it allows for some forgiveness to happen in the relationship. We will be working together. It's going to change the relationship for the better, and that's for the whole community, because we're all going to need to seek a long-term community. Ngāti Rangwai Waiwahi are not distant from our community. They are a fully integrated part of it. They'll be working just as hard as we will to find a long-term solution as mutual beneficiaries. So I think it's a great proposal. We've been proactive, not reactive, and I'm delighted that it got brought forward so that we have this time till 2018 to get all those things signed off and work for a good future for all of us with our water supply. Thank you.
Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, this has been a number of years to get to this stage, and I'd like to appreciate the officers involved in getting it to this stage, plus the iwi from Ngāti Rangirewe, because they've suffered a lot in the previous years with insults from different people. Now we've got to a stage where we can go forward. My suggestion, Madam Chair, would be to change one of the words in number 4. My suggestion would be to change one of the words in number 4, take out the word should and put must, that the council officers must continue to work with. Because the word should, an officer could think, well, that they don't have to.
Sorry, so the council officers. Oh, that council officers continue to work. Thank you. Thank you. Oh, you have a further question. Yes, thank you, Councillor Schrenk.
Question on the bottom of page 55 under 7.1, the budget considerations. I presume the 3.5 is in the long-term plan. It says it's likely to be significant and have been identified, so have we got the whole lot in there? 3.5.
Thank you. Thank you. 2, 3, 4, 5. Thank you. Just before I put the motion, first of all, thank you for the report. I have to say that while we're all thinking this is a good thing, and obviously it is, in 2008, this council applied for another 25-year resource consent. Had it not been for Rangi Kahikite, had it not been for Rangi Wewehi through their treaty settlement, this discussion will be coming on board when our grandchildren are sitting here at the table. So I think we need to just be mindful of that. And before I put the motion, in my position as the chair, I'd like to ask if there is anyone from Rangiwewehi who would like to make a comment or two. It is significant. Tēnā koe rangi. Rangi ka hikitea.
Tēnā tātou. Tēnā tātou. Tēnā tātou katoa. Tino hari koa ahau no te mea. Taku roi mata kua heke. This is quite surreal. Thank you, councillors and council staff, Mayor Chadwick. I'm going to go home and get a hiding, actually. I'm going to share that part with you because of your consideration. We're getting a little bit of a decision like probably 3 weeks before we were expecting to. That confirms that we have been working very well with your staff to get to this point. We thought this was a huge step coming today, and we were prepared to accept that you would deal with this matter in confidence. I'm completely blown away because now I've got to go home and admit to the trustees, the decision makers, the iwi, you've brought something forward that it's very surreal. It's almost part of a dream come true, or it is definitely a dream come true. We still have a lot of work to do together, and we are really looking forward to doing that. This is an incredibly powerful signal to our people. We have some of our people who are still working in the realm and believing in the realm of when council sees something that is going to happen, it doesn't matter what the tangata whenua or the community say. Once council has decided, that's it. You have totally dislodged that belief, and it will be our pleasure to take that message home to our people that are not watching on live stream already today, and that's why I'm going to get a hiding. I didn't expect to have this opportunity, but I do want to acknowledge Toro and Gina Mohi, who are also here today. You would have had us in force, and I want to thank particularly Henry and Dave, and your planning and your engineering staff, even right down to Moriora. He's a key part of this, Carla herself, Carla Kiriopa, and even your landscaping staff have been involved in all this background work that has led to today. You gave me a few minutes. I'm just so appreciative. You have, I think you get the gist. Tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ora, thank you very much. This recommendation will go to full council should it be passed in a minute. It has been moved by Councillor Donaldson, seconded by Councillor Gould. And then we're talking about recommendations 2, 3, 4 and 5. They are up there. We've had some good discussion this morning. I won't read them, but I'd like to put that motion now. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Contrary? Thank you. Passed with unanimously. Kia ora, thank you. Thank you. We'll go into we go into confidential. Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Hunt. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Thank you. We'll take a 5-minute recess.